Uncle James raised his glass at my sister's engagement party and asked, casually, if I was still living in the $1.5 million house, and the silence from my parents was louder than the music. My name is Lauren Whitfield, I'm 30 years old, and that was the moment the story my family had been telling about me finally collapsed in front of everyone. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The party was supposed to be about my sister, Megan. Her engagement. Her ring. Her future. My parents had rented out the private room of a vineyard just outside Napa, all warm lights and polished wood, the kind of place that looks effortless when money is doing the heavy lifting. Guests drifted between cocktail tables, champagne flutes catching the glow, everyone dressed in shades of cream and navy like it had been planned weeks in advance. I arrived alone, as usual. Megan spotted me immediately and waved, flashing the ring like it was part of her hand now. Mom hugged me a little too quickly, already scanning the room behind me as if checking who noticed. Dad clapped my shoulder and told me I looked, well, the same neutral word he'd used for years. I stayed near the edge of the room, smiling when spoken to, listening more than talking. That was my role at family events. Reliable. Uncomplicated. The daughter who never made scenes. Uncle James, my dad's older brother, showed up late. He always did. He had that energy, successful, loud, curious in a way that made people nervous. He hugged Megan, teased her fiancé, then made his way over to me with a grin. Lauren, he said, looking me up and down. You're looking settled. Thanks, I replied. He raised an eyebrow. Still up in the hills? I nodded. Yeah. That place is gorgeous, he said. Last time I was out there, Zillow said it crossed 1.5. I felt my mother's body stiffen beside me. Uncle James laughed lightly, like he'd just mentioned the weather. Crazy market, huh? You bought at the right time. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. Conversations around us softened, people leaning in without meaning to. I looked at my parents. My mother's smile had frozen. My father was suddenly very interested in his drink. Megan glanced between us, confused. Uncle James frowned slightly. What? Did I get the number wrong? No, I said calmly. That's about right. The silence deepened. My mom cleared her throat. James, maybe now isn't. Oh, he said, holding up a hand. I didn't mean anything by it. I just remember you two telling me Lauren was struggling. There it was. My parents had always liked that word. Struggling. It explained everything while revealing nothing. Why I didn't come on family trips. Why Megan got help with her down payment and I didn't. Why they'd once told relatives I was still figuring things out, well into my late 20s. Dad finally spoke. It's not appropriate to discuss finances here. Uncle James blinked. We're celebrating an engagement at a vineyard, not a funeral. Megan laughed nervously. Wait, Lauren, what house? I met her eyes. The one I live in. Her smile faltered. You bought a house? Yes. Mom cut in sharply. Lauren prefers privacy. That wasn't true. They preferred the story. Uncle James studied my parents, then me. Something clicked behind his eyes. You did well for yourself, he said, quieter now. I did, I agreed. The band started up again, but the mood had changed. My parents excused themselves, suddenly busy, whispering as they moved away. Megan stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. You never told me, she said. You never asked, I replied gently. Later, as speeches began, I stood with a glass of water, watching my parents hover near Megan, correcting details, managing impressions. I thought about all the times they'd told me not to mention work. Not to talk numbers. Not to make things awkward. I hadn't planned to say anything that night. I hadn't come to reveal a secret or settle a score. I'd just shown up as myself, and that had been enough to crack the version of me they'd been maintaining. Uncle James caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small nod. Not congratulatory. Just knowing. My mother avoided looking at me for the rest of the night. On the drive home, I replayed the moment again and again, not with anger, but with clarity. I finally understood why they'd kept me quiet. Why success had been something I was expected to achieve, but not display. In their version of the family, I was supposed to be the background story that made Megan's shine brighter. They didn't expect anyone to ask questions. They didn't expect me to answer honestly. And they definitely didn't expect that one offhand comment would expose years of carefully managed silence. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the lights of the house warm against the dark hillside, I knew something had shifted permanently. They couldn't put this back. And for the first time, I wasn't going to help them try. The next morning, my phone was already buzzing before I'd finished my coffee. 3 missed calls from my mother. 2 from my father. 1 long text from Megan that I didn't open right away. I stood at the kitchen window instead, looking out over the fog still clinging to the hillside below my house, and let myself feel the quiet. No one else was here. No one else's expectations filled the room. Just me, and the life I'd built piece by piece without their help. When I finally checked the messages, my mother's tone was exactly what I'd expected. Not angry. Controlled. Carefully wounded. Last night was uncomfortable. We need to talk. My father's were shorter. Call us. This didn't need to happen the way it did. Megan's message sat unread at the bottom, heavier than the rest. I knew hers wouldn't be about optics. It would be about confusion. Maybe hurt. I wasn't ready for that yet. I showered, got dressed, and drove into the city for work like nothing had changed. Meetings. Deadlines. Small talk over email. But beneath it all, my mind kept circling the same realization. They weren't upset that I owned a house. They were upset that someone else knew. Around noon, Uncle James called. Hope I didn't step on a landmine, he said without preamble. I smiled despite myself. You didn't. You just pointed at one. He laughed softly. Your parents have been creative over the years. That's one word for it. There was a pause. You okay? I am, I said honestly. I think I've been okay for a while. I just wasn't allowed to be visible. Visibility tends to scare people who rely on shadows, he replied. Listen, if this gets uncomfortable, you don't owe anyone explanations. I know, I said. And for once, I meant it. That evening, I finally opened Megan's message. Why didn't you tell me? Mom says you didn't want us to know, but that doesn't sound like you. I sat on the couch, rereading it, then typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the truth. I didn't hide it. I just stopped correcting what they told people. Her reply came quickly. So, you've been doing well this whole time? Yes. Another pause. They told me you were barely getting by. There it was. The version of me they'd fed her. The struggling older sister who made Megan's milestones look even shinier by comparison. I'm sorry, she wrote next. I feel stupid. You're not, I replied. You were given a story. We didn't say much more that night, but the distance between us felt different. Less defensive. More uncertain. 2 days later, my parents asked me to come over. I debated it longer than I used to. Not whether I should go, but whether I wanted to. That distinction felt important. In the end, I agreed, on my terms. I'd come for an hour. No ambushes. No relatives present. When I arrived, my mother was already tense, hands folded too tightly on the kitchen table. My father stood near the counter, arms crossed. "This is awkward," my mother began. "It doesn't have to be," I said, taking a seat. "You embarrassed us," she said, skipping pleasantries. I answered a question. "You didn't have to confirm numbers. I didn't bring them up." My father sighed. "James shouldn't have said anything." "James asked because he knew," I said. "Other people probably do too." My mother's eyes narrowed. "We've tried to protect you." "From what?" I asked. She hesitated. "From expectations. From pressure." "No," I said quietly. "You protected a narrative." My father shifted. "We didn't think it was relevant." "It became relevant when you used it to explain why I was always excluded." Silence settled between us. My mother finally said, "Megan didn't need to feel overshadowed." That was the closest thing to honesty I'd heard from her in years. "I wasn't trying to overshadow her," I replied. "I was just living." My father looked at me for a long moment. "So what now?" I thought about that. About how, in the past, I would have rushed to reassure them. To promise I'd keep things quiet. To make myself smaller again. "Now," I said, "I stop pretending I need permission." My mother's lips pressed together. "You could have told us." "I tried," I said. "You didn't listen." I stood after exactly an hour. On the drive home, I felt lighter, not because things were fixed, but because I hadn't bent. I'd told the truth without defending it. I'd let the discomfort stay where it belonged. That night, Megan sent another message. "Can we talk sometime? Just us." I looked around my living room, at the art on the walls, the quiet confidence of the space. "Yes," I replied. "We can." Whatever came next, it would be built on honesty. And this time, I wasn't going to disappear to make it easier for anyone else. Megan came over the following Sunday afternoon, alone. No parents. No fiancé. Just her car pulling into my driveway, hesitating for a second before shutting off the engine. I watched from the window as she sat there, phone in her lap, taking a breath like she was bracing for impact. I recognized that feeling. I'd lived in it for years. When she walked in, she looked around slowly, really seeing the place this time. The open layout. The view spilling through the glass doors. The quiet confidence of a house that wasn't trying to impress anyone. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you," I replied. We sat at the kitchen island with coffee between us. No small talk. Megan had never been good at pretending when things mattered. "I feel like an idiot," she said finally. "I honestly thought you were struggling. Mom told me you were stressed all the time." "I was stressed," I said. "Just not for the reasons she said." She nodded, eyes fixed on her mug. "They helped me with the engagement party deposit. With the venue. With the ring insurance." She looked up. "I thought that was normal. That's what parents do." "And I'm glad you had that," I said. "This isn't about taking anything away from you." "Then what is it about?" she asked. I considered the question. "It's about me always being the explanation. The reason things were tight. The cautionary tale." Her face fell. "I never thought of it like that." "I know." She swallowed. "James asked me later why Mom and Dad never talk about your job. He said you're doing really well." I smiled faintly. "He tends to notice things." Megan leaned back, exhaling. "It's weird. I've spent my whole life thinking I was the one everyone worried about. That you had it easier because you didn't need help. That wasn't ease, I said gently. That was absence. The word hung between us. She nodded slowly. I think they needed you to be small. I didn't argue. After a while, she asked, why didn't you ever just tell me? I looked at her. Because I didn't want you to feel like you were competing with me. And because correcting them every time was exhausting. She winced. I wish you had. I wish you'd asked, I replied, not unkindly. We talked for hours. About childhood. About expectations that had been placed on us without our consent. About how praise and protection can warp in different directions. By the time she left, the tension between us had softened into something tentative but real. 2 weeks later, my parents hosted a small follow-up dinner. Just immediate family. Megan asked me beforehand if I wanted to go. I'll go, I said. But I'm not performing. She nodded. Me neither. The evening was polite. Too polite. My mother avoided anything personal. My father asked surface-level questions about work without digging. Megan and I exchanged looks across the table, silently acknowledging the shift. Halfway through dessert, my mother cleared her throat. James has been vocal, she said. I raised an eyebrow. About? About fairness, she admitted. I didn't respond. He thinks we didn't give you enough credit, she continued. That we relied on assumptions. That's true, I said. She flinched, then nodded. We didn't mean harm. I believe that, I replied. But impact still matters. My father spoke up. We didn't think you wanted attention. I met his eyes. I didn't want erasure. Silence followed. Not hostile. Just heavy. That night, when I left, my mother hugged me. It was awkward and brief, but it was the first time she hadn't whispered advice into my ear while doing it. A month later, Megan asked me to be involved in her wedding planning. Not as the quiet helper. As a voice. I want you there, she said. Really there. I agreed. The truth is, nothing magically resolved. My parents didn't suddenly become self-aware champions of equality. But something fundamental shifted. The story they told about me no longer worked, and they knew it. At work, I was promoted to a leadership role I'd been circling for years. I didn't downplay it. I didn't soften the news. I let it stand. The house stopped being a secret. Friends came over. Colleagues visited. My life expanded outward instead of folding in. One evening, Uncle James stopped by unexpectedly while in town. He stood on the deck, looking out over the view. Nice place, he said again. I laughed. You already said that. Worth repeating, he replied. Then, more seriously, you handled all this with a lot of restraint. I handled it with honesty, I said. That's new for me. He nodded. People get uncomfortable when the quiet one stops being quiet. I'm okay with that now. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't need an apology to move forward. I needed space to exist without explanation. And now that I had it, I wasn't giving it back. The engagement party fallout didn't explode the way people expected, it seeped into everything instead. Phone calls grew careful. Invitations arrived with caveats. I noticed how often my parents checked with Megan before mentioning me, like they were afraid of setting something off they couldn't control. I kept my distance on purpose. Not as punishment, but as practice. I wanted to see who I was without translating myself first. Weeknights became quiet rituals, cooking, reading, walking the property at dusk while the valley cooled and the lights below flickered on. The house felt earned in a new way, not because of the price tag, but because it finally held my whole voice. My parents invited me to brunch the following weekend. Neutral territory, my mother said. A cafe in town with outdoor tables and a waitlist. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. Megan texted beforehand, "I'll be there early." That helped. When I arrived, they were already seated. My father stood to greet me, stiff but polite. My mother smiled like she was hosting clients. Megan squeezed my hand under the table, grounding me. Small talk first. Weather. Traffic. Wedding vendors. Then my mother leaned in. "James has been asking questions," she said. "I imagine he has," I replied. "He thinks we minimized you," she continued. "That we misrepresented things." "That's accurate," I said gently. My father exhaled through his nose. "We didn't think it mattered." "It mattered to me," I said. "And to Megan." Megan nodded. "It did." My mother's eyes flicked to her. "I never wanted you two competing." "We weren't competing," Megan said. "We were being managed." The word landed. My mother flinched. Brunch ended without resolution, but something cracked. Later that afternoon, my father called alone. No speakerphone. No preamble. "I'm proud of you," he said. It sounded practiced, but sincere enough to keep. A week later, my mother asked if she could visit the house. I hesitated, then agreed, with boundaries. 1 hour. No tours. No commentary. She arrived carrying a plant, an offering. We sat in the living room, sunlight cutting across the floor. She looked around, quieter than usual. "You've done well," she said finally. "I know," I replied. She swallowed. "I think I was afraid that if people saw you clearly, they'd ask why we didn't." I didn't argue. Some truths don't need witnesses. Wedding planning ramped up. Megan asked my opinion on vendors and timelines. Not as a helper, but as a partner. We laughed more. We disagreed without punishment. It felt unfamiliar and right. At work, I closed a deal that had taken months. My name led the email. I forwarded it to my parents without commentary. My mother replied with a thumbs up. Progress is sometimes small. Uncle James invited me to dinner before he flew home. Over pasta and red wine, he said, "You don't owe them the version of you they're comfortable with." I thanked him. He raised his glass. To being visible. By the time invitations went out, the story had changed. Not completely, but enough. People asked me about my work. About the house. I answered plainly. My parents listened. On the drive back up the hill one evening, I realized the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was spacious. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't explaining. I was just living, and letting that be seen. That understanding carried me through the months that followed. I stopped previewing my choices for approval. I booked trips when I wanted, declined invitations without excuses, and shared news when it felt right, not when it felt safe. When questions came, I answered with facts, not disclaimers. The more ordinary I made my success, the less power it held over the room. Megan noticed first. She started calling to ask how I'd learned certain things, contracts, negotiations, timing. Not for shortcuts, but for perspective. We met for walks, traded notes, laughed about our parents' tells. The rivalry they'd feared never appeared. What grew instead was something steadier. Respect. My parents adjusted slowly. My father asked for advice once, then thanked me without jokes. My mother practiced restraint, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. When she slipped, I named it and moved on. Boundaries, I learned, don't need speeches. They need repetition. By summer, the house hosted dinners with friends and colleagues. I watched conversations unfold without shrinking. The view did the talking, I did the listening. And in those easy evenings, I understood the real shift wasn't public or dramatic. It was internal. I no longer waited for permission to be seen. I knew then that whatever came next would be honest, unedited, and mine to own, and that choosing visibility once had taught me how to choose it again, calmly, consistently, and without apology, even when the room went quiet and expectations tried to return anyway. The wedding took place in early autumn, when the air was still warm but carried the promise of change. Megan looked radiant. Not in the curated, Instagram-perfect way she'd grown up mastering, but grounded. Present. When she caught my eye from the aisle, she smiled, not for the room, not for the cameras, but for me. I smiled back, feeling something settle into place. My parents were on their best behavior. Polite. Careful. My mother fussed over centerpieces instead of people. My father stuck close to the bar, nodding at conversations he used to dominate. No one mentioned the house. No one mentioned money. And for once, the silence felt intentional, not imposed. At the reception, Uncle James clinked his glass during toasts. My parents stiffened instinctively, then relaxed when he spoke only about love, timing, and the courage it takes to let people become who they are. He met my eyes when he said it. I raised my glass back. Later, Megan pulled me aside near the dance floor. Thank you, she said. For not disappearing. And for not rescuing me either. You did the work, I replied. I just stopped getting in the way. She laughed. That's still a skill. The months after the wedding were quieter. Good quiet. I hosted Thanksgiving at my place for the first time. Friends filled the kitchen. Laughter bounced off the walls. My parents arrived on time and left early, grateful instead of entitled. My mother complimented the food without suggestions. Progress. At work, I took on a mentorship role. Younger colleagues asked questions I'd once been afraid to voice. I answered plainly. I watched them grow faster because they weren't taught to be small. That mattered. One evening, my father called to ask about refinancing options. He listened. Took notes. Thanked me. When we hung up, I sat for a moment, surprised by the absence of resentment. It turns out resentment fades when you stop repeating the same harm. A year after the engagement party, Uncle James visited again. We stood on the deck, the valley glowing below. Still quiet up here, he said. By choice, I replied. He nodded. Good. Before he left, he added, you know, families often need a witness. Someone who asks the question out loud. Thank you for being that, I said. He smiled. You answered it. That's what mattered. On the anniversary of that party, I hosted a small dinner. Megan came. So did a few friends who knew the whole story and many who didn't. My parents sent flowers with a note that read, "Proud of you." No qualifiers. I placed the vase by the window and let it be what it was. Looking back, I understand now that the question about the house wasn't the rupture. It was the reveal. The moment the version of me that had been quietly maintained could no longer survive contact with the truth. They went silent because silence had always been their tool. I broke it by living out loud. If there's a lesson here, it's not about money or real estate or embarrassing parents at a party. It's about refusing to carry someone else's comfort at the cost of your own visibility. It's about answering questions honestly, even when the room goes still. I didn't set out to shock anyone. I set out to stop hiding. And once I did, everything else fell into place.